The morning alarm blared through Station Kepler at exactly 0600 hours, just like every other day. But today would be different. Today, the most feared cadet in the entire Galactic Naval Academy was about to meet his match. Cadet 13 rolled out of his narrow bunk with the smooth precision of someone who had perfected the art of minimal effort. His silver-blue skin caught the artificial light as he stretched his 4-foot frame. The other cadets in the barracks were already scrambling to get ready, shooting nervous glances in his direction. He had earned his reputation the hard way. Last week, he had reprogrammed the entire food distribution system to serve everything upside down. The week before that, he had somehow convinced the Academy's cleaning robots to form a conga line through the main corridor during the morning inspection. The instructors still had not figured out how he had done it. Commander Zixtel stood in his office, staring at yet another incident report with his 4 crystalline arms crossed. The tall hegemony officer had been running military academies for over 30 years, but he had never encountered a cadet quite like 13. The young Vexithani was brilliant. There was no denying that. His tactical scores were among the highest in Academy history. His combat simulations were flawless. His understanding of military strategy surpassed some of the instructors. The problem was everything else. "Sir," Lieutenant Corneth entered the office carrying a datapad. The insectoid officer's mandibles clicked nervously as he spoke. "We have another situation with Cadet 13. Commander Zixtal sighed, a sound that his species made by vibrating their throat crystals. What did he do this time? He has taught the other cadets in his section to communicate using only mathematical equations. They are conducting entire conversations by writing numbers on surfaces. The instructors cannot understand what they are saying during lectures." The commander rubbed his upper temples with 2 of his hands while the other 2 reached for his morning stimulant drink. "How is that even possible?" "We are not sure, sir. The equations appear to be standard mathematical formulas, but when arranged, in certain patterns they seem to convey complex ideas. Cadet 13 created an entire language system overnight. This was typical. Cadet 13 never did anything small. When he caused trouble, he did it with the same precision and creativity that made him excel in combat training. The other cadets both feared and admired him. Even the strict Corvani instructors, known throughout the galaxy for their rigid discipline, had started avoiding direct confrontation with him. In the mess hall, Cadet 13 sat alone at his usual table. This was not because he was unfriendly, but because sitting near him was dangerous. You never knew when one of his pranks might explode around you. Literally in some cases. The other cadets watched him from a safe distance. There was Cadet 45, a nervous Plutonian whose tentacles twitched whenever 13 looked in his direction. Cadet 7, an ambitious Andromedan who desperately wanted to understand how 13's mind worked but was too proud to ask. Cadet 23, a quiet hegemony student who secretly admired 13's creativity but would never admit it. They all knew the stories. How 13 had single-handedly defeated an entire squad of senior cadets in a training exercise by convincing them they were fighting a completely different battle. How he had once made the Academy's main computer system compose poetry instead of processing tactical data. How he had figured out 17 different ways to make the gravity generators play musical notes. But what they did not understand was why he did these things. The truth was simpler than anyone realized. Cadet 13 was bored. Desperately, mind-numbingly bored. The Academy's training programs were designed for average students from dozens of different species. They moved at a pace that allowed everyone to keep up. For someone with 13's intellectual capacity, this was torture. He could complete most tactical exercises in his head before the instructors finished explaining them. He had memorized every regulation in the Academy handbook and found loopholes in most of them, so he entertained himself. Lieutenant Corneth had tried to explain this to his colleagues during their weekly staff meeting. "The cadet is not malicious," he had insisted. "He processes information faster than our teaching systems can provide it. He needs challenge, real challenge, or he will continue to create his own entertainment." The other instructors had nodded, politely, but none of them wanted to deal with 13 directly. It was easier to let him continue his pranks as long as no one got seriously hurt. and the basic training schedule continued. This morning, however, something was different in the air. Word had come down from High Command the night before. The Terran exchange program was finally beginning. After months of preparation and diplomatic negotiations, the first human would be arriving at the Academy. Most of the officers were curious about this new species. Humans had only recently joined the Galactic Council, and information about them was still limited. The reports described them as bipedal mammals from a planet called Earth, with a curious mixture of intelligence and emotional instability that made them unpredictable in combat situations. Commander Zixtal had read the files with interest. Humans appeared to be natural problem solvers, but they approached challenges in ways that defied conventional logic. Their military history was filled with victories that should have been impossible, and defeats that should never have happened. They were simultaneously brilliant and foolish, careful and reckless, disciplined and chaotic. In other words, they might be exactly what the Academy needed to deal with. Cadet 13. The commander had not shared this theory with anyone else. It was probably wishful thinking, but there was something appealing about the idea of introducing two unpredictable elements and seeing what happened. At worst, they would cancel each other out. At best, they might actually learn something from each other. The human transport was scheduled to arrive at 1400 hours. Commander Zixtal had already decided to assign the newcomer to room with Cadet 13. The compatibility assessment computers had suggested this pairing based on their psychological profiles, though the commander suspected the computers were simply trying to contain both problems in one location. Down in the barracks, Cadet 13 was preparing for his next project. He had discovered that the Academy's atmospheric control system could be adjusted to create specific air pressure patterns. With the right calculations, he could make walking through certain corridors feel like moving through thick liquid, while others felt like floating in zero gravity. It would be his masterpiece of environmental manipulation. He had no idea that his carefully ordered world was about to be turned completely upside down by a species that treated chaos as a natural state of existence. The other cadets continued their morning routines, unaware that their legendary troublemaker was about to discover what real unpredictability looked like. They knew 13 as someone who could calculate 17 different outcomes for any situation and choose the most unexpected one. They were about to meet someone who did not bother calculating outcomes at all. Station Kepler rotated slowly through space, its artificial gravity and controlled environment maintaining the illusion of a normal planetary base. Inside its metal walls, representatives of 47 different species learned to work together, fight together, and think together. Soon, that number would be 48, and everything would change. The transport shuttle docked with Station Kepler at exactly 1400 hours, its hull still warm from the jump through hyperspace. Jake Morrison stepped out of the airlock carrying a single duffel bag and wearing a grin that had gotten him into trouble since he was 5 years old. The 22-year-old former Marine looked around the docking bay with obvious excitement, taking in the mix of alien species bustling about their duties. He whistled softly under his breath, a habit that would soon drive his instructors crazy. Everything was bigger than he had expected. The corridors were wide enough for species twice his size, and the ceiling disappeared into shadows above. Strange smells filled the air, some pleasant and others making his nose wrinkle. The constant hum of machinery created a background noise that felt both alien and oddly comforting. Commander Zixtal waited at the security checkpoint, his forearms clasped behind his back in the formal hegemony greeting posture. The crystalline officer had reviewed Jake's file 3 times, but reading about humans and meeting one were apparently very different things. The young man moved with a loose, casual stride that somehow managed to look both relaxed and alert at the same time. "Human Morrison," the commander said, his translator device working overtime to convert his formal tone into something resembling English. "Welcome to the Galactic Naval Academy. I trust your journey was acceptable." Jake's grin widened as he looked up at the towering alien officer. "Best trip of my life, sir. Though I have to say your pilots are a lot more careful than ours. We would have shaved at least 2 hours off that flight time." The commander's upper eyes blinked in confusion while his lower eyes continued to study Jake. Human humor was apparently going to be a challenge. Safety protocols are standardized across all member species for good reason, Human Morrison. Oh, absolutely, sir. Safety first and all that. Though I did notice your navigation system takes some interesting routes. Very scenic. Lieutenant Corneth, who had been standing quietly beside the commander, made a note on his datapad. The human had been on the station for less than 5 minutes and was already questioning established procedures. This was either a very good sign or a very bad one. The orientation process began immediately. Jake was escorted through a series of briefings that covered everything from basic station procedures to interspecies etiquette. He nodded politely at everything, asked what seemed like reasonable questions, and gave every appearance of being a model student. What the instructors did not realize was that Jake was not just learning the rules. He was cataloging them, sorting them, and instinctively identifying which ones were suggestions and which ones actually mattered. It was a skill he had developed during his time in the Marines, where the difference between regulations you followed and regulations you worked around could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. The meal schedule is posted in each barracks section, Instructor Veltar explained, her scaled hands gesturing toward a holographic display. All cadets are expected to maintain proper nutritional intake according to their species requirements. JK studied the display with interest. What happens if someone misses a meal? Medical automatically flags nutritional deficiencies and issues dietary supplements. And if someone eats at the wrong time, the system logs the irregularity, but takes no immediate action unless it becomes a pattern. Jake filed this information away with the dozens of other little details he was collecting. Every system had flexibility built into it. Every rule had exceptions. Every procedure had workarounds. The key was understanding which parts were actually important and which parts were just there to make administrators feel better. After 4 hours of briefings, Commander Zixtal personally escorted Jake to Barracks Section 7. The corridor was quieter than the others they had passed through, and Jake noticed that the few cadets they encountered seemed to hurry past without making eye contact. Your bunkmate has been selected based on compatibility assessments, the commander explained as they stopped in front of a standard dormitory door. The computer systems indicate you should work well together. Jake's grin took on a slightly different quality. Compatibility assessments, huh? What kind of compatibility are we talking about here? Academic performance, psychological profile, species interaction preferences, and disciplinary records. Disciplinary records? Jake's tone remained casual, but something in his eyes sharpened. Should I be worried about something, sir? The commander hesitated for just a moment too long before answering. Your roommate is unique among our cadets. I trust you will find the arrangement educational. The door slid open to reveal a small, but efficiently designed room with 2 bunks, 2 desks, and 2 storage lockers. Sitting at one of the desks was the smallest humanoid Jake had ever seen. Cadet 13 looked up from whatever he was working on, and Jake got his first good look at the Academy's most notorious troublemaker. The Vexthani was barely 4 feet tall, with silver-blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly in the artificial light. His large, dark eyes held an intelligence that Jake recognized immediately. This was someone who saw everything, processed it all, and was probably 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. So you are the human, Cadet 13 said, his voice carrying a slight musical quality that Jake would later learn was typical of his species. They warned me about you in orientation. Jake tossed his duffel bag onto the empty bunk and turned to face his new roommate properly. Funny thing about that, they warned me about you too. This got 13's attention. He set down whatever he had been working on and gave Jake his full focus. What did they warn you about yourself? The question caught Jake completely off guard. He had been expecting the usual getting-to-know-you conversation, not philosophical interrogation. What makes you think they warned me about anything? Cadet 13 tilted his head, studying Jake with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Because they do not send normal examples to exchange programs. They send the ones who do not fit standard parameters. The ones who require special handling. The ones who create problems that need solutions. Jake felt his confident grin falter for the first time since arriving at the academy. This little alien had just read him like an open book in less than 30 seconds. You seem to know a lot about problem solving. I am something of an expert in the field, 13 replied with what might have been humor. Though I suspect our approaches are different. How so? I create problems that reveal flaws in systems. You create problems that reveal flaws in thinking. Jake stared at his roommate for a long moment. How could you possibly know that? Your psychological profile was available in the orientation materials. Also, your body language indicates someone who improvises rather than plans. Your questions during briefings focused on flexibility rather than compliance. Your reaction to authority suggests respect without deference. And that tells you I reveal flaws in thinking? That tells me you approach problems from directions others do not consider. When conventional thinking fails, unconventional thinking becomes valuable. Jake sat down on his bunk, suddenly feeling like he was the one being oriented rather than the other way around. What were you working on when I came in? Cadet 13 glanced back at his desk, where several data pads displayed complex diagrams and calculations. A theoretical modification to the atmospheric control system that would allow for localized gravity variations in specific corridor sections. Why would you want to do that? To see if it was possible. Also, because walking through the main corridor during shift changes is boring. Jake laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise both of them. You want to make the hallways more interesting by messing with gravity? The current configuration is inefficient. Traffic flow could be improved with strategic modifications to the local gravitational fields. Also, it would be amusing to watch Commander Zixtal try to walk through a section calibrated for microgravity while carrying his usual data pads. That sounds like it would get you in serious trouble. Only if they could prove it was intentional rather than a system malfunction. Jake studied his roommate with new interest. Cadet 13 was not just a troublemaker. He was an artist. His pranks were not random acts of rebellion, but carefully crafted experiments in cause and effect. He pushed boundaries not just to see what would happen, but to understand how the boundaries worked in the first place. How long have you been planning this gravity thing? 3 weeks. I needed to understand the underlying systems before attempting any modifications. And how long will it take you to actually do it? 6 hours, assuming I can access the control systems without triggering security protocols. Jake was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that would change everything. What would happen if you did not have to worry about the security protocols? Cadet 13's large eyes focused on Jake with laser intensity. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone could get you access to the control systems without triggering any alarms? How long would your project take then? 30 minutes. But that would be impossible. The security systems are designed to prevent exactly that kind of unauthorized access. Jake Morrison had been at the academy for exactly 6 days when he did something that had never happened before in the station's history. He made Cadet 13 nervous. It started during their first joint combat simulation. The exercise was standard. Tactical training where 2-person teams had to capture a defended position using limited resources. Cadet 13 had run this simulation dozens of times and had developed what he considered the perfect solution. It involved a 3-phase approach that violated exactly 2 regulations in ways that were technically legal, but ethically questionable. He explained his plan to Jake in precise detail, using diagrams and mathematical projections to show why it would work. Jake listened carefully, nodded at all the right places, and asked intelligent questions about timing and positioning. Cadet 13 felt confident they would achieve the highest score in Academy history. The simulation began at 800 hours. Cadet 13 moved into position for Phase 1 of his carefully planned assault. He expected Jake to circle around to the eastern approach, according to their agreed strategy. Instead, when 13 looked at his tactical display, Jake was nowhere near his assigned position. The human had somehow made his way to the simulation control room. Jake, what are you doing? 13 whispered into his communicator, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. You are supposed to be establishing the diversionary position. Change of plans, Jake's voice came back cheerfully. I am having a conversation with the computer. What kind of conversation? Well, I started by asking it what would happen if this was not actually a combat exercise but a diplomatic mission that had been misclassified due to a filing error. Cadet 13 felt something he had never experienced before during a tactical exercise. Complete confusion. That is not possible. The simulation parameters are fixed. The computer cannot change the basic scenario. That is what I thought too. But it turns out the computer is required to verify mission classifications if presented with reasonable doubt about the accuracy of the original briefing. Jake, that makes no sense. How did you even get into the control room? I told the security system I was conducting a routine inspection of the simulation equipment. Apparently, human safety protocols require manual verification of all systems before we participate in combat training. They watched his tactical display in growing amazement as the simulation environment began to change around him. The enemy forces were laying down their weapons. Background music was starting to play. His own weapon had somehow transformed into what appeared to be a musical instrument. Jake, what did you do? I convinced the computer that we are actually cultural ambassadors who have been sent to establish peaceful relations with the local population through interpretive performance art. The simulation ended 15 minutes later, with Jake and 13 recording a perfect victory through what the computer classified as successful diplomatic resolution of a conflict situation. The reviewing instructors spent 3 hours trying to figure out how the exercise had been completed without anyone firing a shot. Lieutenant Korneth filed a report that he knew no one would believe. Human Cadet appears to have convinced the tactical computer to rewrite fundamental simulation parameters during active exercise. Request immediate consultation with Systems Analysis Department. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the Academy experienced a level of creative chaos that made Cadet 13's previous pranks look like minor inconveniences. The difference was not in the scale of the disruptions, but in their complete unpredictability. When 13 reprogrammed the gravity generators to create his carefully planned corridor modifications, Jake somehow convinced the maintenance robots that the new gravitational fields were part of an artistic installation. The robots began performing synchronized maintenance dances in the affected areas, turning 13's tactical experiment into an impromptu cultural event. When 13 modified the food synthesizers to produce nutritionally perfect but humorously shaped meals, Jake programmed them to announce each meal with personalized songs about the cadet receiving the food. The mess hall became a constant musical performance where every meal came with its own theme song. The other cadets watched these developments with a mixture of awe and terror. They had grown accustomed to 13's calculated chaos, but Jake's interventions followed no pattern they could understand. Where 13 bent rules with mathematical precision, Jake seemed to ignore the existence of rules entirely. Cadet 45, the nervous Plutonian, found himself caught in the middle of one of their collaborative projects. He had been walking through Section C when the corridor suddenly felt like he was moving through thick liquid. This was 13's gravity modification working exactly as planned, but then Jake's contribution kicked in, and the maintenance robots began, offering him dance lessons while cheerful music played from hidden speakers. I do not understand what is happening, 45 told his roommate that evening, his tentacles still twitching from the experience. Cadet 13's pranks always made sense even when they were impossible, but the human does things that should not work at all. The roommate, Cadet 7 from Andromeda, had been thinking about the same problem. I have been analyzing their methods. Cadet 13 approaches problems like mathematical equations. He identifies variables, calculates outcomes, and chooses the most effective solution. But the human does not calculate anything. Then how does he succeed? I think he just tries things and adapts to whatever happens next. This observation was closer to the truth than either cadet realized. Jake Morrison had learned his problem-solving skills in environments where careful planning was often less valuable than quick adaptation. Military operations rarely went according to plan, so the ability to improvise had become more important than the ability to predict. But what disturbed Cadet 13 was not Jake's improvisation skills. It was his complete lack of tactical anxiety. When 13 executed a prank, he spent hours considering every possible consequence and preparing for 17 different ways the situation could develop. Jake appeared to execute his ideas without considering consequences at all. This violated everything 13 understood about intelligent behavior. "How do you know your plans will work?" 13 asked one evening as they prepared for another joint exercise. Jake looked up from where he was modifying his equipment in ways that probably violated several safety regulations. "I do not know they will work. That is what makes it interesting." "But what if something goes wrong? Then I figure out how to deal with whatever goes wrong." "But what if you cannot figure it out in time?" Jake shrugged. "Then I learned something new about what does not work." Stared at his roommate in genuine confusion. "That is not strategic thinking. That is not even tactical thinking. That is just hoping. Maybe. But it is also staying ready for possibilities I have not thought of yet." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. Commander Zixtal's voice echoed through the barracks with barely controlled frustration. "All cadets report to the main assembly hall immediately. We have a situation that requires explanation." Jake and 13 exchanged glances. They had been working on a new project involving the atmospheric recycling system and some creative reinterpretation of environmental safety protocols. "Did you tell the recycling computers they were actually art therapy systems for stressed cadets?" 13 asked. "Only after you convinced them that optimal air quality required periodic injection of mood-enhancing aromatics," Jake replied. They could hear other cadets moving through the corridors, all heading toward the assembly hall. Many of them were humming cheerfully, which was unusual for evening formation. The aromatics had apparently been more effective than either Jake or 13 had expected. "We might be in trouble," 13 observed. "Probably," Jake agreed. "But look at it this way. Everyone seems really relaxed about it." As they joined the stream of unusually happy cadets heading toward what was likely going to be a very serious conversation with the commander, 13 realized something that made him more nervous than any punishment possibly could. He was starting to think like Jake. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself humming along with the other cadets as they walked through corridors that smelled faintly of vanilla and ocean breezes. Maybe there was something to be said for not overthinking everything after all. The Academy's annual war games began on a Tuesday morning, with all the ceremony and precision that the Galactic Naval Academy could manage. 64 senior cadets from 23 different species stood in perfect formation as Commander Zixtal explained the rules of the most important exercise of their training. "This simulation will test everything you have learned," the commander announced, his forearms gesturing toward the massive holographic display showing the exercise area. "You will be divided into teams of 8. Your mission is to capture and hold strategic objectives while preventing other teams from doing the same. The exercise will continue for 72 hours, or until one team achieves total victory." Jake Morrison stood next to Cadet 13 in the formation, both of them trying to look appropriately serious. They had been hoping to be assigned to the same team, but the random selection process had other plans. When the team assignments were announced, Jake found himself leading Team Blue while 13 was assigned to command Team Red. They would be fighting against each other. After the briefing, the teams had 4 hours to prepare before the exercise began. 13 immediately gathered his 7 teammates in Conference Room C and began what would become legendary as the most thorough tactical briefing in Academy history. His team included Cadet 7 from Andromeda, who specialized in long-range reconnaissance; Cadet 23 from the Hegemony, an expert in defensive systems; Cadet 31, a Corvani demolition specialist known for his precise planning. 3 other cadets with complementary skills rounded out what 13 considered a perfectly balanced tactical unit. The exercise area contained 17 strategic objectives, 13 began, displaying a 3-dimensional map that he had somehow acquired and enhanced with additional detail. Control of any 10 objectives for more than 6 hours constitutes victory. However, the real challenge is not capturing objectives but holding them against counterattack. For the next 3 hours, he outlined a strategy that accounted for weather patterns, supply line logistics, communication protocols, enemy movement predictions, and contingency plans for 15 different tactical scenarios. His teammates listened, with growing respect as 13 demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that would have impressed professional military officers. Our primary advantage is coordination, 13 explained. We will move as a single unit, capture objectives systematically, and establish defensive positions that support each other. By hour 18, we should control the central cluster of objectives and be positioned to respond to any threat. Meanwhile, Jake had gathered his team in the Academy's botanical garden. His 7 teammates included Cadet 45, the nervous Plutonian, who had gotten caught in too many of Jake and 13's collaborative projects; Cadet 52, a methodical vegan who preferred detailed planning; Cadet 19, an enthusiastic young hegemony cadet who reminded Jake of himself at that age; 4 others who had volunteered for Jake's team mostly because they were curious about human tactical methods. "Okay," Jake said, sitting cross-legged on the grass while his teammates arranged themselves in a loose circle. "Who here knows how to fold paper airplanes?" The question was so unexpected that nobody answered for several seconds. "Paper airplanes?" Cadet 52 asked carefully. "Is this a human tactical concept?" "Kind of. See, the thing about tactical exercises is that everyone expects you to think tactically. But what if we did not think tactically at all?" Jake began demonstrating how to fold paper from his notebook into small flying shapes. "The exercise area has 17 objectives, right? And everyone is going to fight over them like they are the most important things in the universe. But what if they are not? The objectives are how you win," Cadet 45 pointed out, his tentacles nervously folding a piece of paper with surprising skill. "That is one way to win. But maybe there are other ways. Maybe the real objective is not to capture the objectives, but to understand why the objectives matter in the first place." His teammates exchanged confused glances, but they continued folding paper airplanes while Jake talked about weather patterns, local wildlife, and the interesting geological features of the exercise area. By the end of the briefing, they had a pile of paper aircraft and what seemed like no tactical plan at all. The war games began at dawn. Team Red moved out with military precision, following 13's carefully planned route toward their first objective. They moved in formation, communicated through encrypted channels, and executed textbook tactical maneuvers. Team Blue wandered into the exercise area like they were on a nature hike. Jake led his teammates along paths that seemed chosen at random, stopping frequently to examine interesting rock formations, discuss local plant life, and conduct what appeared to be impromptu science lessons about atmospheric pressure and wind patterns. By noon, 13's forces had captured 3 strategic objectives and established defensive perimeters around each one. Their communication network was functioning perfectly, their supply lines were secure, and their tactical position was exactly where 13 had predicted it would be. Jake's team had captured 0 objectives. They had, however, discovered 17 different types of mineral deposits, identified 3 separate weather systems moving through the area, and somehow befriended a family of small animals that were native to the exercise zone. "This is going exactly according to plan," 13 reported to his teammates as they consolidated their position around Objective 7. "We are ahead of schedule and have encountered no significant resistance. Victory should be achieved by tomorrow evening." Cadet 7, monitoring long-range sensors from their command post, confirmed that most other teams were following predictable patterns. Team Blue appears to be. I am not sure what they are doing. They seem to be conducting some kind of scientific survey rather than participating in the exercise. Felt a moment of doubt. Jake's apparent lack of tactical focus could be a brilliant deception, or it could be exactly what it appeared to be. With Jake, it was impossible to tell the difference. The first indication that something was wrong came at 1300 hours when the weather changed. The exercise area had been experiencing clear skies and light winds since dawn. Suddenly, dark clouds began building on the horizon. Within 30 minutes, the atmospheric pressure had dropped significantly, and the first rumbles of thunder could be heard in the distance. "Storm approaching from the southwest," Cadet 7 reported. "Should reach our position in approximately 2 hours." Checked his tactical planning files. He had accounted for the possibility of weather changes but the meteorological data had indicated clear conditions for the entire exercise period. How severe is the storm expected to be? Uncertain. The atmospheric readings are unusual. This does not match any of the predicted weather patterns. The storm hit at 1500 hours with an intensity that surprised everyone. Lightning filled the sky with electrical discharges that interfered with communication systems. Heavy rain turned the exercise area into a muddy landscape that made movement difficult. Most importantly, the electromagnetic activity began disrupting the sophisticated electronic equipment that all the teams were using. Der watched his carefully coordinated communication network fail piece by piece. His teammates could no longer maintain contact with each other or with their command post. The tactical displays that had been showing perfect situational awareness went dark. The defensive systems that had been protecting their captured objectives stopped working. For the first time in his academy career, 13 experienced complete tactical helplessness, but Jake's team seemed unaffected by the storm. In fact, they appeared to be thriving in the chaos. While other teams struggled with disabled equipment and broken communications, Team Blue was moving through the exercise area with obvious purpose for the first time since the games had begun. They had been preparing for this moment all along. As 13 watched his perfect strategy collapse around him, he realized that Jake had not been ignoring the tactical situation. He had been thinking on a completely different level, preparing for possibilities that 13 had never even considered. The human had beaten him not through superior planning, but by planning for the failure of all plans. The storm passed by evening, leaving the exercise area muddy and filled with the wreckage of sophisticated tactical equipment. Team Blue had won the war games in a way that nobody had expected or could fully explain. Jake's seemingly random wandering had positioned his team perfectly for the electromagnetic chaos that followed the lightning strikes. While other teams struggled with disabled communications and broken equipment, Jake's people had been using simple hand signals and basic coordination methods that worked perfectly in any weather. Cadet 13 sat in the debriefing room 3 hours. After the exercise ended, staring at the tactical analysis reports with something approaching shock. For the first time in his academy career, he had experienced complete defeat. Not just losing, but losing in a way that made his entire approach to problem-solving seem inadequate. "How did you know about the storm?" he asked Jake when his roommate finally returned to their quarters that evening. Jake was muddy, tired, and grinning with the satisfaction of someone who had just pulled off something impossible. "I did not know about the storm specifically, but I noticed the air pressure dropping during our briefing session, and the wind patterns looked wrong for the weather reports they had given us. But that is not tactical planning. That is just paying attention to random details." "Maybe, but when you rely on complex systems, you become vulnerable when those systems fail. So I figured we should be ready for our equipment to stop working." Studied his roommate with new eyes. "You planned for equipment failure from the beginning." "I planned for everything I could think of to go wrong. Then I tried to be ready for everything I could not think of too." This conversation changed something fundamental in their relationship. Instead of competing with each other, Jake and 13 began working together in ways that surprised everyone at the academy. Their combined approach to problems created results that neither could have achieved alone. Their first joint project after the War Games involved the Academy's training simulation systems. 13 had identified 17 different ways the current programs could be improved to provide better tactical education. Jake had noticed that the simulations were so predictable that cadets were learning to game the system rather than actually learning tactics. Working together, they created something entirely new. "We should design a simulation that adapts to whatever the students try," Jake suggested during one of their evening planning sessions. "That would require the computer to think creatively rather than just following programmed responses," 13 replied. "Current systems cannot do that." "What if we taught them how?" The result was a training program that learned from every cadet who used it. Instead of presenting the same challenges in the same ways, it analyzed each student's approach and created new problems designed to force them beyond their comfort zones. Cadets who relied on superior firepower found themselves in scenarios where violence made situations worse. Students who preferred careful planning encountered rapidly changing conditions that required immediate adaptation. The instructors were amazed by the improvement in cadet performance after just 2 weeks of using the new system. Commander Zixtal found himself filing reports that he never thought he would write. Request immediate review of training protocols across all academy systems. The collaborative approach developed by Human Morrison and Cadet 13 has produced measurable improvements in tactical thinking among all student populations. But it was the fear that proved most significant. The other cadets had always been wary of 13's calculated unpredictability. They knew he was dangerous because his pranks and tactical innovations followed patterns they could understand, even if they could not predict them. Jake's chaotic creativity had been concerning but seemed mostly harmless because it appeared random. The combination of the two was terrifying. Cadet 45 tried to explain it to his study group one evening. Separately, they are problems we can work around. Cadet 13 thinks faster than most of us, but he thinks in ways we recognize. Human Jake does things that make no sense, but they usually work out somehow. Together, they are something completely different. Different how? Asked Cadet 52, who had been on Jake's team during the war games and was still trying to understand what had actually happened. They make each other more than they were individually. 13's planning gives structure to Jake's chaos. Jake's adaptability gives flexibility to 13's precision. The result is tactical thinking that operates on levels we cannot even recognize, let alone counter. This assessment was proven correct during their final joint exercise before graduation. The Academy's senior instructors had designed what they called an impossible scenario, specifically to test the limits of the Jake and 13 partnership. The exercise involved defending an indefensible position against overwhelming odds with inadequate resources and no possibility of reinforcement or retreat. It was intended to be a lesson in accepting defeat gracefully while maintaining military discipline under hopeless circumstances. Jake and 13 did not try to win the exercise. Instead, they changed what winning meant. Using a combination of 13's systematic analysis and Jake's intuitive communication skills, they convinced the attacking forces that the entire scenario was based on outdated information. The conflict they were simulating had already been resolved through diplomatic channels that had not been included in the exercise parameters. Within 2 hours, both sides were working together to rebuild the damaged infrastructure of the battlefield. Rather than fighting over control of it, the instructors were forced to end the simulation manually because the computer systems could no longer determine what the exercise was supposed to be measuring. Lieutenant Korneth filed his final report on the human exchange program, with recommendations that would reshape military training throughout the galaxy. Human tactical thinking operates on principles of adaptive chaos that, when properly integrated with existing systematic approaches, can transcend conventional strategic limitations. Recommend immediate expansion of exchange program and development of new training methodologies that incorporate human flexibility principles alongside traditional tactical education. As graduation approached, Jake and 13 prepared for their first real assignment together. They had been posted to a frontier exploration vessel where their combined skills would be used to establish first contact protocols with newly discovered civilizations. "Are you nervous about working with unknown species?" 13 asked as they packed their belongings for departure. Jake considered the question while folding his few possessions into his travel bag. "I am more excited than nervous. Every new species we meet will have different ways of thinking about problems. That means more opportunities to learn new approaches. What if their approaches conflict with ours? Then we figure out how to combine the best parts and create something better than any of us had individually." Realized that Jake had just summarized everything he had learned during their time together. The human had taught him that the best strategy was not perfect planning, but perfect adaptability. Sometimes the most effective response to an impossible situation was to make it possible by changing the fundamental assumptions. For the first time in his life, 13 looked forward to encountering problems he could not solve immediately. Jake had shown him that not knowing the answer was not a weakness to be overcome, but an opportunity to discover something new. The Academy held graduation ceremonies on a Friday morning with representatives from 48 different species in attendance. Jake Morrison and Cadet 13 received commendations for innovative tactical thinking and collaborative problem-solving. More importantly, they had changed how the Academy thought about military education. Future cadets would be trained not just to follow established procedures, but to question those procedures and improve them when necessary. As their transport ship prepared to depart for the frontier, Jake and 13 stood in the observation deck looking back at Station Kepler. The Academy continued its rotation through space, training the next generation of galactic military officers. "Do you think they will miss us?" Jake asked. Considered the question seriously. "I think they will be relieved that we are gone and worried about what we might do next." That sounds about right. Behind them, the galaxy stretched out in all directions, filled with unknown species, unexplored systems, and problems that had not been solved yet. For the first time in either of their lives, the future felt limitless rather than predetermined. Even Cadet 13 had to admit that not knowing what came next was the most exciting feeling in the universe.